英語会話。
Hello everyone, welcome back to our English conversation program. How are you doing today? I hope you're fine. Since this is Saturday, I'd like to invite you to join me for the coffee break. Here with me are
Sue Wanwick
and Tony Newell.
Let's have fun talking over a cup of coffee.
A special welcome to our coffee break discussion, everyone. Well, I once read that the British are the most voracious newspaper readers in the world. They read them at breakfast, they walk to the bus reading a paper, they read a paper on the bus as they go to work, and on the way back from their office on the tube, or even in their cars while waiting at some traffic lights. And after work, they're engrossed in an evening newspaper. It sounds as if the newspaper were the most essential thing in your life, Tony.
Yes, it just about is, Mr. Torgel. But I think not only for the British, but also for the Japanese, the Americans, the Russians. I think that the role of newspapers today is very important in modern life. Wouldn't you agree, Sue?
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think it's really appropriate that we're talking about newspapers in general today, since we're going to have a foreign news editor from Japan's leading press company as our monthly guest next week. I hope our discussion will provide some general information about newspapers in America, Britain, and Japan.
Okay, let's begin by talking about the physical side of a newspaper first. Any Japanese who reads an American newspaper for the first time is certain to be really amazed at the great number of its pages. And if you grapple with the Sunday edition squarely, you will end up doing nothing but reading it all day long, and perhaps you still won't finish it. I wonder why it's got so many pages, Sue.
Well, it's an interesting point. I can't tell you exactly why there are so many pages, but I don't think very many people, especially on Sundays, read every word in the paper. I found some statistics about the length of newspapers, and in America, the average daily paper is about 50 pages, actually 49 pages long. The New York Times and the Washington Post are around 100 pages. And on Sundays, a lot of papers get up to around 300 or 400 pages.
Wow.
Especially on Sundays, there's a lot of advertising, stores and things like that, of course, but also usually several sections of classified ads, that is, personal announcements and advertisements. Another part of our Sunday paper would be the supplements, Sunday supplements. What about in England? Do you have these?
Yes, we have supplements too. As for the size of British papers, the weekday papers, I think, are not quite as thick as those in the States. And in Britain, the Sunday papers are certainly thicker than the weekday papers, but nothing quite like what I've heard people call the doorstep newspapers of the States.
I wonder how they can tell a telephone directory from a newspaper.
What kind of supplements do you have then in your Sunday paper? I wonder if they're like ours, colored pictures or features?
Yes, they're on sort of a glossy paper, nice big pictures, and just general sorts of topics discussed.
Almost like a little magazine.
That's right, yes.
So I suspect that newspaper delivery is also in itself quite an uphill job. And my first impression of a thick, heavy American newspaper was that it was full of advertisements.
Yes, and this is one of the main reasons that the paper is so thick. The classified ads particularly, people can advertise anything from cars and houses to small things like cameras, musical instruments, even pets. It's really like a bulletin board for the community.
Did you ever put an ad in the paper yourself, Sue?
Yes, several times. My family's sold various pieces of old furniture, and one story that has a very nice ending.
Yes.
One time we decided we wanted to buy a tandem bicycle, that is a bicycle for two people. And we saw one advertised in the newspaper. It wasn't very expensive, so we bought it. And we used it for a few years, and when we decided it was time to get rid of it, we just didn't have the room. Again, we advertised in the local paper. And the people who called about it and came to look at the bicycle turned out to be a young couple who liked to do things outdoors, and it happened that the wife was blind. Mm-hmm. So she wanted to ride a bicycle, but of course, as she couldn't see, it was impossible. But on a two-seat bicycle, she could ride any place with her husband, and she could feel the wind in her hair.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what a good idea.
And, you know, the chances of their finding a used two-seat bicycle at that price, and we just happened to be getting rid of one, just by chance, or going in a bicycle shop, it would have been very hard to find.
That is a story with a happy ending.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it certainly is. So I understand that then in the United States, people are heavily dependent on newspaper advertisements when they want to purchase something or they want to sell something.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. And they're reliable. You mean the ads are reliable?
Of course, you can negotiate with the people, and it's a way of buying and selling things without going through an agent or a store. So sometimes the prices are advantageous to both sides.
So you can get better prices.
Are they covered by a code of conduct? In Britain, you've got to be honest in your advertising. And if you are...
Like that.
I think another reason, or we could perhaps give at this point, is that these voluminous papers often carry consecutive feature series on current problems and current events. For instance, the New York Times once did a 5-day feature series on the problems of education in Japan.
Oh.
And they used all the proper Japanese expressions like kyoiku mama and shikenjigoku. And that was intended to give an in-depth account of daily Japanese life. I think also there's the question of competition with the other news media, such as TV and radio. According to a recent survey in which readers were asked by what media they learned of important news, more than half of them mentioned television, which far exceeded those who referred to newspapers. That was about 25, 27% or so. And radio was even less, about 17%, I think.
I think the TV and radio stations see themselves as a fast news service without much detail, and then where the newspapers really have them beat, I suppose, would be in depth.
Yes.
So in a way, that's you could say they're competing, but it's a different scale of reporting.
今日はニュースペーパーですね、新聞という話題でお話をしておりますが、これはまあ誰でも気づくことですが、最初にアメリカに行きますと、アメリカの新聞があまりにもページ数が多いということですね。でこれはまあどういうところにその理由があるのかということを今お話ししましたところ、まあ、大きな理由が2つ出てきました。一つはまあ非常に広告が多いということですね。ところがまたこの広告が非常に実際の日常生活の中で有効に使われているという例で、昔スーさんのお宅で2人乗りの自転車を広告に出して、そしてたまたまそれを購入を希望した夫婦がおられたわけですけれども、その夫婦の一人の方の方が目が不自由な方であったために、ちょうど2人乗りの自転車が非常に重宝がられたという、そういう今お話を伺いましたが、そういうふうに広告が日常生活の中にうまく取り入れられている、利用されているということと、もう一つは他のメディア、例えばラジオ、テレビ、そういうものとある程度競争していくというふうな意味で、非常に内容の充実した報道をしなければいけない。そういう意味でどうしてもページ数が増えてくる。つまりスペシャルフィーチャーズ、特別な記事を組むとかですね、あるいは場合によってはサプリメント、付録増補版をつけるというふうな形で、他のメディアとの兼ね合わせを考えていくわけですね。And in Japan, I would think weekly magazines seem to play a unique role in the supply of such, say, in-depth information you have just mentioned about Japanese situations. And do you have any comment on your weekly magazines?
We don't have as many as you do here, I don't think. We do have some large news magazines. Time and Newsweek are two of the big ones that you have here in Japan as well. Magazines like that tend to stress news more than human interest. We have several weekly magazines that smaller ones that represent a particular political point of view. And just for fun, we have kind of rumor newspapers all about movie stars and gossip and things like that. They're sold not at newsstands, but at supermarkets.
Oh.
And no one takes them too seriously.
And what about in Britain, Tony? Are there, say, as many as weekly magazines in your country?
Well, there aren't as many weekly magazines in Britain as there are in Japan. Weekly magazines in Britain do cover a whole spectrum of interests, but I think there are quite a lot which aim especially at women. Yeah, but actually, to return to the topic of newspapers, I think that besides offering features which are common to newspapers all over the world, the British newspaper does tend to specialize in the woman's page. And there the writer will deal with fashion and food and household appliances or the bringing up of children, things like that.
So that can be one of the features of British newspapers, you mean? And just one other thing. On my last visit to America, I found that there were quite a few newspaper vending machines at street corners in most of the cities I visited. And one newspaper which especially caught my attention almost everywhere was, you comment on this, Sue?
Yes, well, this is something brand new. It's only about a year old. And it's different because it's a national paper. In the United States, almost everything is on a local or regional basis. That is, unlike Japan, the papers are independent, not national. We take news from international news services, but then that news is edited locally by the independent newspaper. But U.S. Today is electronically transmitted around the country and then just printed locally.
Oh, I see. So that's how it's unique in the sense that it's only America's first national newspaper. Well, incidentally, to conclude today's program, let me just give you one riddle about newspaper. And why is a newspaper like an army? In other words, what do a paper and an army have in common? Do you have any idea?
No idea. Please tell us.
Okay. They both have leaders, columns, and reviews.
Oh, I see.
So probably it might be a good idea to explain what these terms mean.
Yeah, because those words can be used in two ways. Well, I can imagine the leader of an army, but how is that used in the world of journalism?
A leader is the most important story of the day. It's called the leading article. So it's often the first thing you see when you pick up the newspaper.
Oh, I see. What about review?
Well, in a military sense, it's used to mean the formal inspection of troops. Perhaps by a visiting dignitary. But for a newspaper, it's used for a critique of books or a critique of...
book reviews.
Yes, or perhaps theatre or films.
That's very interesting to know. Okay, and let's have a quick look at some other expressions, like he's a cub reporter, which means...
Beginning reporter.
And yellow journalism?
That's kind of sensational journalism and not considered very good quality, maybe fun to read.
And if somebody's working for a newspaper company, press company, we say he works for a press company, and if his job is mostly to cover stories, then what would you say? He's a
reporter.
それから、今、新聞とアーミーですね、軍隊の共通点は何かというふうな、リドルを差し上げましたが、リーダー、コラム、レビューという、こういう3つのものが各々にあるということですね。そして、リーダーと言いますと、指揮者という意味と、それから論説、それからコラムが軍隊では渋滞という意味がありますが、新聞では読み物欄ですね。それからレビューと言いますのが、閲兵、それに対して、批評、批判というふうな意味になります。Well, I'm sorry to say, everybody, but that's all the time we have today, and we certainly hope you enjoyed being with us. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Cheerio.
担当は東後勝明先生。お相手はスー・ワンウィグさんとアントニー・ニューエルさんでした。英語会話を終わります。